Hi, and welcome to our May edition of Planetary Calendar. I'm Lonnie D'Amicis, one of the fabulous duo of Ralph and Lonnie, the authors of Planetary Calendar, and this is my partner in crime, our lovely publisher, Carol Cherry.
Hello, happy May. The month starts off with May Day and Beltane and our lovely get back to warm weather holidays, and that'll be welcome for many people, although we had a beautiful winter here, very, very mild.
We really did.
Yeah.
We can't complain. And of course, we're coming up with the new moon right out of the box. I mean, May starts out, and then we've got the full moon. Mm-hmm. Let me not misspeak there. That full moon happens on the 3rd, and with a black box day to start in May. Now, that may portend a few difficulties in this month, but
it's true, and you can see that we have Mercury opposing Saturn that day, and the moon opposing the sun, of course. That's what a full moon is the moon opposing the sun. But that Mercury on the opposite side of Saturn, oppositions are exactly that. They're on opposite ends of the spectrum, and you can see that they're both looking at the same coin, but one is seeing heads and one is seeing tails. So you can have sort of a disconnect sometimes, and with that, it's our Mercury is our mental and communication energy, along with our responsibilities.
Of Saturn.
So, yeah, and Saturn.
And I find it interesting that, the Mercury is in Gemini, which is in rulership. So you would think that Mercury would be very strong and working just the way that Mercury should, but since it's got this, opposite view of the powers that be, being Saturn in Sagittarius, sometimes Mercury thinks it's Sagittarius, because it's got sort of grander ideas than its own size. So Saturn is definitely imposing his structures on Mercury, which Mercury doesn't take very well. It's kind of like the child and you're holding his hand a little too tightly in that toy store and he wants to grab at everything. So that's the kind of energy that we start out with. But I always like to remind people that oppositions are great opportunities for exchange and cooperation. Because as you said, one sees the head of the coin and one sees the tails on the coin. But if you communicate with each other, you can actually share that information, and so each one can be kind of brought up to speed to understand the whole picture. So
exactly.
They can be frustrating unless you give way to that cooperative energy, and then they become that learning experience.
But what you're not seeing on the planetary calendar is the fixed stars that lunation is happening near. And those fixed stars, Algol and the Weeping Sisters in the Hyades, they're not easy placements. Algol isn't that the eye of Medusa? And the Weeping Sisters, that pretty much says it all. So, we're going to need to take deep breaths on that day. It's going to be work for us to be able to communicate and see the other person's side of the story, so it's...
Well, and at the same time, you've got the sun opposite the moon. And I talked about this opposition a little bit. It's an opposition that I know very well, but in reverse. Because the sun is in Taurus and the moon is in its opposite sign of Scorpio. My natal is exactly the opposite, and this is exact to the degree, which is the time of the full moon, and that is my exact degree opposition as well.
Well, so you're excited about this one,
Well, no, I think this one is a little bit harder than mine. Not that mine is easy, but I think this one's a little bit harder because the sun in Taurus should really be condoning, love of beauty and indulgence and art and all the comforts and everything. And then emotionally, you've got this sort of frigid zone that says you can't really quite relax. You should really kind of deny yourself. And in my opposition, at least the moon gets to go out and make reservations, But here the moon says, no, there's no money in the budget for reservations.
Right.
We're going to eat at home and you're going to like it, kind of a thing. So this is a little bit of a difficult opposition to go along with that Mercury Sagittarius opposition. So again, This is why there's a black box on that day.
Yes, yes, indeed. There is a black box on that day. The next day is May the 4th, and you'll see it's Star Wars Day. May the 4th be with you. Get it?
Good one.
And that's going to happen. We're going to have the Aquarian meteor showers on the 4th and the 5th, lovely Cinco de Mayo. Later in the month, you'll see on the 25th, we have Towel Day, another sci-fi holiday. That's Douglas Adams' birthday. And
very important. Don't leave home without your towel.
Hoopy Fruit always knows where his towel is.
That's right.
I have enough people that celebrate that, so it got added onto the calendar. So.
And if we can't have a little fun, who can?
That's what's life without whimsy.
Especially in a month like this, which may not be that much fun all the time for everybody. So we have to inject a little bit of humor when we can.
It's true. We're treading lightly here with you folks. We're trying to ease you into May because we've got a Mercury retrograde coming up this month. We have Saturn getting ready to return to Scorpio this month. You know, so that full moon in Scorpio sort of sets the tone for the return to Scorpio, and that Mercury retrograde returning and going back and reviewing and rethinking. It's a good time for course correction. You know, so Saturn's been in Sagittarius now since about December. So the universe says, how's that going for you? You know, did you get everything done that you wanted to while it was in Scorpio? Let's go back and have a look and give you a chance to make some kind of minor adjustments.
You're going to have that deja vu all over again feeling. You know, you got, didn't I just do this? Didn't I just go through this?
Right.
What did I say? Didn't I? And then you're going to get that aha moment, and you're going to say, but I could tweak that.
Right.
I can add just this little thing. Maybe I overlooked this little thing. So if you try to look at it with a little bit of optimism and say, okay, let's, you know, pull back just a little bit, review it one more time before the ink dries.
And that's kind of what I was thinking about it. You know, someone who's perhaps in a situation where they say, okay, I'm going to go on without this thing anymore. I love this thing, but I can't deal with it anymore. It's gone. Now perhaps it will come back in a way that you can integrate it into your life, you know, and be able to see it in a different perspective. And with Mercury also in review mode, you know, I mean, there's really is going to be that strong feeling of, as you say, deja vu and refiguring.
And I think that we have to look for our little shining stars wherever we can. And the 7th is going to be one of them because Venus is going to move out of Gemini and into Cancer. And although neither one of those signs are her favorite signs, Venus in Cancer is a lot more sort of nurturing and calming and, you know, giving you that kind of sense of family and support and community. You might want to cocoon a little bit instead of being out there and all over the place, but it might be a time for some much needed rest and introspection and things like that. So again, that Venus going into that calmer sign of Capricorn might be one of those Cancer, I'm sorry, might be one of those little pearls of light at the end of the tunnel.
I think it's also fitting too because Cancer is often considered the sign of the mother, moon ruled, and we have Mother's Day coming up on the 10th. So just after Venus arrives in Cancer, we get to show our moms some love on Mother's Day. So that'll be really nice. Do something decadent, something indulgent, something really lovely. You know, if you've always wanted to go over the top for Mother's Day, you know, this might be a really great year to do that, be well received and well enjoyed.
Or something really quirky because the moon is in Aquarius.
On Mother's Day, yeah.
Technology, you know, maybe that's time to get mom
her new phone.
To technological advances there or something like that.
Not my mom. She's worlds ahead of me technology. I'm a Luddite next to her, and I'm the computer consultant. So
really? Really? Oh well.
But you never
Who taught
say,
me?
Oh, that's true.
Who started me on
that's
the path?
True. I did.
Under your tutelage,
that's right.
I went
soaring. She's my best student too. Really impressive. Really impressive. Then on the 11th, we have the moon going into the 3rd quarter, which often marks a low energy period, and that's where it's going to start to hit the fan, folks. You know, by then, Mercury's slowing down. If you haven't gotten your electronics and your computers, your cars, everything in order by the 11th, just hunker down and hold tight, because that's not the week to do it. That's the week where you take for a little something and it's a huge, big problem, or you know, you lose your computer data or something like that. So take care of all your computer and electronic needs before the 11th would be
well,
my
but
advice.
we've also, you know, as good as we felt about Venus leaving Gemini, we now have Mars entering Gemini. So that means Mars is coming out of Taurus. Taurus is 4 hooves planted on the ground, not moving, stubborn sometimes.
Thoughtful.
And not the greatest place for Mars. It's a little plodding for Mars. Plotting and plotting, because there's a lot more thinking before acting. And that's not something that Mars likes to do. Mars just likes to go. So Mars in Gemini is going to, number one, give you a little bit more energy, maybe give you a few more ideas. And so this reversal of Venus leaving and Mars entering in Gemini is just kind of a little boost.
It's true, but with Mercury in Gemini, I mean, Mercury's in rulership. So when Mercury goes retrograde on the 18th and Mars is in there too, I think that could perhaps cause a little more trouble, perhaps, than we would ordinarily
Well,
like.
they are close at that time, and so working in tandem a little bit. So the earlier part before the 8th, you know, get something done in that week before that retrograde happens, you know?
And take extra care to really look before you leap. Think about what you say before you open your mouth. Think about what you do and what the consequences are. You know, rash behavior, it's going to be so easy, you know,
Well,
but you want to guard against that.
But remember, who's staring at them from across the room?
Who?
Saturn, opposing them.
Dad's
So
watching.
somebody's watching, keeping an eye on the boys. So
There you go.
they can't go too far out of bounds. And of course, when Mercury is retrograde, his hands are tied. So I think that opposition is going to help to sort of rein in that Mars, Mercury wild card kind of thing, just because that Saturn is there.
Maybe,
Yeah,
maybe.
yeah.
You know, all transits, they could be good, they could be bad. It really depends on what you do with them. You know, and a lot of what we have been doing this year so far, and with that terrific, the last Pluto-Uranus function or square that we had going on in March and things, there's a lot of change, there's a lot of transformation. And because we had said with the early lunations, you know, the full moon so early in the month, there's a lot of, I want to do it now, I want to get to it now. But really what we need to be doing, I think, and that forward momentum, I want to do it now, is great. You know, we just need to really carefully think about what we're doing. Be responsible, not be impatient, impulsive, as best as we can, you know, because we're going to be tempted to have that impulsive nature, you know, but the more that we can be less reactive, which, again, you know, I'm going to say, you need plenty of rest, you need to take good care of yourself and be able to not, you know, think before you do, and to be less reactive in the way that you behave, to be able to keep these all important personal changes moving on in a direction that will not only help you, but your tiny little home community and your business community as well, because, you know, none of us are an island, really.
And more than really classifying transits as either good or bad, I like to really view them as difficult or easier. And that has to do with the way that you approach them. If you are acknowledging, what am I trying to get from this transit? What kind of information is trying to be bestowed on me? And in what way am I supposed to use it? If you are cooperating with that and you are really moving towards using the energy of the transit to move in the right direction, those transits are going to be a lot easier. But if you're kicking and screaming saying, hell no, I won't go, and no matter how many times the universe tries to give you a lesson or show you a path or, you know, give you instructions, you're just saying, I'm just going to do my same old, that's what makes those transits more and more difficult. And it's interesting, those transits, you get some of the similar transits that come around on a particular cycle, you know, and the people who say, every time I get my Saturn square, this and this happens, well, you're not learning anything, are you? Because
Mm-hmm.
It should be easier by now.
And exactly, you should be moving on. It should be different. And that's an important thing to remember too, especially with Saturn going back into Scorpio. The folks who hated Saturn in Scorpio, the folks who dug their heels in and resisted, they're going to be the ones who are most uncomfortable during Saturn's return to Scorpio. Not this again. I thought I had to deal with a lot of us who said, oh, okay, that's interesting. I'll try to take that information into account as I change. Oh, I see you're going to go this way. Well, okay, I can try to go this way. And see when you're open to it and willing to move on and grow through the changes, very often you find that they are surprisingly helpful,
Well, and then when it tucks back into Scorpio like it does, you go, oh, that's why I went through all that, because now that I'm seeing it from having gone through all that and made the changes that I wanted to, now it makes perfect sense to me.
In fact, it's better if it goes this way.
Exactly.
I wish I'd have thought of that in the first place.
Exactly.
So it really, really can be nice. And we're going to have that Mercury going retrograde on the 18th, right after the new moon. But then we're going to have a lovely circle day on the 23rd and Memorial Day on the 25th. So you'll have that 1 week of work, which might be frustrating, but then you're going to get a long weekend. And the 23rd is a beautiful day for a party. The 25th is going to be a box day because there's so many squares going on as the moon hits the first quarter and is in Virgo. But you don't have to work.
And let's not forget that on the 21st, the sun enters Gemini. So remember I was just saying about how Saturn is kind of moderating that Mercury and Mars in Gemini. Now the sun gets in the middle of that thing. And the sun is very much inclined to work in cooperation with Saturn. So Saturn's been having to try to control these two wild cards from afar. The sun's right there.
Right.
So now they'll be whipped into line. What does that mean? That means communication should get a little bit more structured because you've got that solar influence on there. And maybe your impulsivity will be slowed down just a little bit because the sun is looking over your shoulder saying, are you sure you want to do that?
Right.
So I think that that also bodes well for sort of calming down some of the frenetic kind of energy that will happen with all those planets in Gemini.
Remember too, though, that when I just saw a great picture on Facebook, when Mercury gets close to the sun, it's very easy to want to talk about our own stuff and not so easy to listen. I just saw this great picture of a man leaning over a woman, and the woman's like this, and they're clearly having a conversation. That's what Sun conjunct Mercury looks like. So as Mercury and the Sun get closer to their conjunction, we're going to have to take some time to listen. And certainly that Saturn in Scorpio is still going to be there, listening to the other person and finding a way to compromise and take everybody's needs and desires into account is going to be important.
This might be a perfect time for a pearl of wisdom from my co-author and partner in crime, Ralph D'Amicis, who writes the forecast every month. And he says on the 18th, Mercury turns retrograde while the moon is under pressure from conflicting voices. It can be a confusing and frustrating day, so curb your ambitions. And here's the important thing: treat things lightly, letting minor irritations pass. So that hovering someone else's sort of opinion, blocking out what you need. No. Let's even that up. And just your new mantra should be, it's only a transit. It's only a transit.
It's true.
Click your heels together. There's no place like home. It's only a transit.
And here's your handy phrase. What an interesting idea. Let me think about that. I'll talk to you later. And you walk away because that's what you're going to wind up wanting to do.
Is that your Mercury and Libra talking?
It must be, because I say that a lot.
That's right. Well, it's good advice.
There you go.
No matter where your Mercury is.
Before we sign off, I want to make sure that we mention that Memorial Day has a meteor shower also, and it's one that I don't see very often, Camelopardalis meteors coming up that weekend.
That's the camel.
There you go.
the Camel constellation.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So, and again, you know, we very often try to put information on meteor shower viewing. In the beginning of the month, that when it's on the 4th and the 5th with the full moon, meteors are going to be difficult to see while the moon is up. I mean, unless it's on the other side, you know, while you're viewing. But on the 24th, that's going to be closer to the new moon, not so close to the full moon. So we'll be trying to post on our Facebook page
what areas where you can
on
see
how to see that and enjoy that.
And of course, we have to point out that there's a black box on the Memorial Day celebration day, the 25th. And so, of course, it wouldn't necessarily be the day to start something new anyway. It's a family holiday, so really take that to heart. You know, don't decide to do that. But there are a lot of squares, you know, so if you've never gotten along with Aunt Barbara and she's coming to the family picnic or something, you know, make sure that you turn the other direction when you see her heading your way, waving her glasses at you, wanting to tell you how you should live your life, you know. So there are a lot of squares going on. There's Venus square Uranus. That anything could happen.
Change in love and comfort.
You know, Sun, Moon, so emotions and identity, and, you know, Mars, Neptune, and they're all square. So tread very lightly.
And drive carefully. Mars squaring Neptune, you know, on Memorial Day. I mean, enough said on Memorial Day, frankly, but with Mars and Neptune, Mars is action, and Neptune, you know, isn't always focused on the ground, you know. I mean, they are very high in the sky, could be daydreaming, could be any number of things. Neptune also would be alcohol potentially, so you definitely do not want to be drinking and driving on this Memorial Day weekend. I mean, in addition to the laws and common sense, the
planets are telling you the same thing.
Yes. So stick with us, friends, and be careful on Memorial Day weekend.
So I think we've got a lot of foreknowledge here now, you know, because forearmed is
forewarned,
or the other way around. I have Mercury in Sagittarius. Sometimes I mix these things up, but you know, my Mercury thinks it's Jupiter. So what can I tell you?
There's always ups and downs. There's always difficult times. There's always, you know, a time to work and a time to rest and a time to play, you know, and the work that we're going to be doing in May I think it's going to be largely internal, you know, and being able to control our impulses and you know, get ready for June, because kids are going to be off from school. You know, this is going to be the end for productive time for parents in many cases.
Some of this energy is going to bleed over into at least the first half of June. And so if you're prepared for this kind of emotional time, you know, maybe you make some plans, you make some pacts, you make some agreements. You know, you make good choices that don't put you in situations where you're going to butt heads with people, and so take a word to the wise and plan ahead.
Not very fair of us to mention Mercury retrograde and not give the end date. So before we sign off, let's say June 11th is when Mercury will be retrograde until, so that's May 18th until June 11th. So
and of course then
calendars.
You've got a couple of hours for the shadows.
Yeah, this is a good time to be thinking about planting. And if you look on the back of planetary calendars, you can find all the information that you need for that. We have a great little chart that shows which signs are good for planting, extremely good, and which ones are poor for planting. You also want to watch the phases of the moon from new moon to full. You want to plant plants that go above the ground from full till third quarter, underground plants, and the last quarter you don't want to plant at all. So you definitely want to take that into account. They didn't listen to me at my house last year, and we got like no tomatoes and half of the crops that we got the year before when they did listen to me. So you definitely want to bear that in mind. Extremely good days are when the moon is in Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces.
Water signs, of course.
Yes. So that full moon on the 3rd, maybe you want to spend that gardening, because that's I'm always looking on the weekend.
Even
days
the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th.
Days.
2nd, 3rd, and 4th is another water weekend. Although Taurus can also be a good a fairly good moon, and so you've got that following weekend as well. That 16th, 17th is another.
And
It's not as good as the water moons, but that's a good moon for
but also the
planting
last
as well.
moon of the month. I know a lot of folks like to plan around Mother's Day. So if you are a Mother's Day planter, then that first weekend in May is a good idea. The last weekend in May also has the moon in Scorpio on the 30th and the 31st. So get our sustainable veggies going, babe. Okay.
For the summer.
For the summer, right.
Yeah. And so I think that
there's a lot of holidays this month. We've got, like I say, May Day, Beltane. We've got the National Day of Prayer in the United States on the 7th. We have got the meteor showers, Cinco de Mayo. We've got Buddha Day all there in that first week. We've got Mother's Day. We've got an Islam holiday, Lalat al-Miraj, and Declaration of the Bab on the 21st. Victoria Day for our friends in Canada. Pentecost and Shavuot on the 24th. And Memorial Day. And, of course, Towel Day. So,
and Star Wars Day.
And Star Wars Day.
So, just for the fun of it.
Yeah, May the 4th be with you.
And that wraps up our May forecast for Planetary Calendar. Make sure you check us out at planetarycalendar.com or check us out on Facebook for more details. We're always posting additional information about meteor showers and what have you. And we'll see you next time for June.
Bye.
One of our founding fathers, Benjamin Franklin, was an important astrologer. In fact, his original booklet that made him famous, Poor Richard's Almanac, was an astrological almanac, very much like our planetary calendar. In fact, in the first edition of that, there's this whole discussion where he's telling how his wife has asked him to start making some money because he spends all of his time with his instruments and his telescope, and it'd be nice if he made some money too, and therefore the publisher of this has agreed to pay him a certain amount per copy if he will fill the columns. And so in the first edition, there's this whole discussion where he runs into his friend on the street, and his friend, who's also an astrologer, is having this argument with him about when the man is going to die. Quite a question to ask in the street. Well, the reason for the question is that he wants to know whether or not he should be paying his bills after a certain date. So it's a very practical question. You know, and throughout history, most of the questions that people have asked related to astrology have been practical questions. In fact, when we go back to the roots of astrology, or the roots that we know about, because it clearly goes before recorded history, the first way in which astrology was used was primarily for the geometry of land, property lines. This goes back to the Greeks and their islands, and the fact that location was so important. As they started dividing land up, they used the geometry of astrology and astronomy to divide their lands and establish property lines so it could be passed down through the family.